Hello and welcome to another segment of The Buzz on Politics. I'm your host, Martin Lopez. With me here today, I have Denver Cook, who's running for St. Johns County School Board, District 4, and Ken Organis, who is running for the Florida House District 16 seat.
Yes.
And so, today we're going to sit here and we've been having some conversations that have been fantastic, and it's all focused primarily on school safety. But we've all agreed recently that the conversations need to happen at the local level, at the state level, and from the private sector, from the public sector. This is a full team effort. And so thank you, gentlemen, for sitting here with me to talk about this. I think it's important that we were discussing earlier that we all agree this is a community effort. People getting involved with other people, talking to each other, respectfully, all these things that we were talking about. But I think in terms of school safety, there are some universal truths that I think no matter where we are in the political spectrum or where we are, running for different boards, we agree that we have to do whatever we have to do to make our kids safe, to make this a better environment for them. And so you all have your various points and everything. My main question today for you guys is, starting at the local level, how would you like to see certain things implemented, whether it's in St. Johns County, Duval County, doesn't matter. How would you like to see people actually engage with each other so that we can start that change?
Well, I think it's really important when you talk about how are you going to engage and communicate is that we have to be willing to have some intelligent, deep conversations about issues that are complex and challenging and not make them politically pointed,
Right.
Not make it about one-liners or my little segment of my population and my supporters against everyone else. And in that, we need to be willing to really think outside the box and have some difficult conversations. We need to, as we were discussing earlier privately, we need to be willing to have conversations and risk offending the people in an intelligent conversation, not being offensive.
Right.
Being offensive is not appropriate. It's not personal. This is about what are you going to do. But if we're not willing to risk coming out with a conversation or an idea that you may not agree with, so therefore I'm not going to air it, we're never going to get to a solution
Right.
that truly works. Depending on your political perspective and your leaning, we all have some differing opinions on where we should approach something, be it federal should be in charge or the lowest possible level or the state's the boss or whatever. At the end of the day, this really is about my neighborhood, my community, and my school. It's not about what's going on in Seattle or California
Right.
or New York or Texas. For me, it's about what is going on in Nocatee and Ponte Vedra, my local community. What do we need to be doing? What are our challenges for our kids and our community? And they're very different than they are for Duval County.
Right.
To consistently ask the state to resolve all of that when you have 75, I believe it is, school districts, 67 counties, I think is passing off responsibility.
Right.
And we need to take holistic approaches to this. And we're not going to agree on everything.
Right.
But ultimately for me, as a parent, it is about what environment is my kid going to be in. Is it going to be an environment where they can thrive, or is it going to be one where they're worried every day and can't become the best them? And locally, we need to start leaning in more, developing our own programs, developing our ways of approaching these ideas, and asking to be supported to do that.
Right.
From the state, not having the state tell us how to do everything specifically. One of the things I do like about 7026 is it gave a variety of options for districts to utilize, and each district is doing it a little bit differently.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing. One of my, locally for me, one of the challenges though, the bill was passed in 21 days, which is a very short time, so it's not a perfect bill. In St. Johns County, it took 90 days almost until we had a joint meeting between the school board and the county commission where the superintendent laid out an initial proposal that it wasn't even to be voted on. That's 66 days before we were going back to school with our kids. They still haven't finalized their plan, and what are we going to be doing in less than 2 months to make sure our kids are safe, both from a physical plant security, from a law enforcement or armed guard security standpoint, but also from a programming standpoint for their mental health.
Right. And that kind of ties into at the state level where you're heading, hopefully.
Right.
You hear these things and you have your own visions and your own plans and proposals and everything. And it's like we said, that's what it takes for people to actually hear out. In your case, your constituents, if you earn the seat. And so what would be your first step, if you will, hearing these concerns that people have approached you with? What would be the first step that you would take if you actually win your candidacy?
Okay, excuse me. My very first step would be to engage the school boards, because I believe, like Denver does, that the state and the local school boards have to work together. I do, though, believe it does require funding, because the law specifically states that the safety officers must be certified police officers. Now, you can't hire a certified police officer for $12.50 an hour.
Right.
That's going to cost $60,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. That's funding only the states, only the state on the state level, the state legislature can drive that. I do believe that while the school boards, local school boards, need to be given a lot of leeway, and by the way, I fully support the school board's lawsuit against Governor Scott regarding the charter school industry legislation that was passed last year. But only the state has the power in many ways to implement these things. I can't imagine each individual school board coming up and saying, okay, we need to keep the guns out of the hands of mentally unstable people. I can't imagine every individual school board saying there must be a certified, police officer. Some things have to be driven by the states. Some things have to go back to the school boards, and we need to work together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And getting to what Denver was saying earlier, I'm in total agreement with you, Denver, when you were saying that this has to start at the home. This has to start in the school, teaching basic civics, teaching basic courtesy, teaching how our government works and how our government works by being civil towards one another. And I believe that approach will reach fruition in 6 or 8 years. My approach, though, is we need to do something now. We can't let this go on. We've had one school shooting per week. We need to do something, and it might not be perfect, but President Truman once said, if there's a problem, come up with a solution and try it. Right. And if it doesn't work, throw that solution out and try something else. But we can't sit here, I'm sorry, Denver, but we can't sit here and wait 6 or 8 years. It's important. We need to do it, but we need to do also something right now.
Well, and I want to tack onto that a little bit here and really have a real discussion about it. I would love the state to be able to come up with enough money to pay for every school to have one or even 2 youth resource officers. That would be great if the state were to come up with the money for that. I sit in a community right now, the state didn't come up with the money for that. So locally, I have to say, how do I fill the gap to get what I think is most important? And I have to make some local trade-offs. And if our legislature and our governor fund everything as full as we want, more power to them, and I will say thank you for every penny you send. But that's not the situation we live in. I was having a conversation a while ago, and somebody said, well, our FTE dollars are far less in Florida than they are in just about every state in the nation, compared to, over twice FTE dollars in New York City. And I said, well, I agree, but I live in an environment where they are what they are, about $7,300 per student. So I need to develop a way to make sure for that dollar amount I have, I provide the best environment. Those are two separate conversations. Where does the money come from? The money we have is what we have. What are we going to do to make sure that we are able to accomplish the end goal? And it may take 7, 10, 18 years to change the culture in our schools. I agree with you on that. But today, in St. Johns County, if we want to deliver a youth resource officer to every one of our school sites, will cost $5.5 million. The state has provided under their new laws $1.5 million. There's $500,000 roughly coming from Safe Schools, which was previous funding, which is $2 million. We need to close basically a $3.5 million gap. The county commission could add a line item to our property taxes of $0.1 million and get us to that 5.5 number the sheriff outlined to put a youth resource officer in every school. That said, if all of that happened today, it would still be 6 months before those first deputies would be trained, qualified, certified, and online. But that's not the path we're headed to. There would have to be some interim things like maybe armed security on a temporary basis till you have YROs up. But that's not the ultimate path of our community right now that our leaders are taking. They're saying what is the least expensive way to meet the requirement of a law so that it doesn't cost us anything or cost us the least amount possible. And that's a Band-Aid to a problem. And I don't believe that enacting Band-Aids for problems is a resolution for long-term outcome and success in what we're talking about. So I would encourage you, if you're at the state level, find the money, awesome. But right now it doesn't exist.
Right.
So we need to locally say, what do we need to also fill? And as a community member, I will tell you, I'm willing to pay
Right.
my share locally.
Right.
I don't think it needs to be a handout every time from on high. And that's just a personal belief. I think these things will take a lot of time to change the environment.
Yep.
But if we don't start doing it, we'll never get there. If we don't start a pathway to put a YRO in every school, we will never get there. Duval County has chosen not to put YROs. They've chosen armed officers we were talking about earlier. Those armed officers will not be engaging with students in the schools.
Right.
Yeah, they will be
Good-
there to
good- good
stop
and
an
bad,
assailant, but they're not actually
But
be
they're
there
not
to
being
be a role
proactive.
model and a guide
Right.
and to create a bridge to law enforcement
Right.
for these youth as someone that they can trust and count on. And if they're having a challenge at home, they can walk up to
Right.
him and say, Officer Steve, could you please help me out because I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to behave, or I was being bullied. We've heard cases and stories of YROs in West St. Augustine taking the time to walk students home because they felt they'd been bullied on their way home by people in the community. And they walk them home after
And I think
school.
that speaks to the caliber of people. You have to have the right people there who are willing to take those steps, that are willing to go that distance with these students wherever they're at. And I think, coming from the private sector, hearing all this, like you said, I'm willing to pay whatever is needed. If it means my kid is going to be safe, then sky's the limit. And so keeping all options, doesn't matter what they are, on the table, so we can talk through it and see, what, that one's not going to work, or maybe we should lean more towards this, and constantly evaluating. And like you guys were saying, it's a push-pull from the top and the bottom. We have to meet each other and have these conversations so that in the end, however it comes out, our schools and our students and our kids are safer.
And you're absolutely right, Denver. The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School Safety Act was underfunded, and it's left the school boards in a lurch. And the school boards have my sympathy. Yeah. They are struggling. You're struggling to do everything you can to comply with the law to make the schools safe, and you don't have the appropriate funding. Where I disagree a little bit is the money is there. Some 30 years ago, we passed a lottery referendum. And that lottery referendum said that everything collected, all the revenues from that state lottery were to go 100% for education. Now you take that and you add to it the nearly $1 billion that the state was required to write to the voucher school industry at the beginning of the year. You take that money, we could fully fund every school board for an armed certified police officer in every school. We could do it before the beginning of the year. If we only use the money we had for the way it was intended.
Yeah, and I want to go real quick into a little kind of uncommon ground when we're talking about this. We have to also deal with the fact that our kids are not all in traditional public schools in our communities. When Duval County and St. Johns County are very different, you have a large number of charter schools here.
Right.
The Senate Bill 7026 isn't going to do away with those schools. They are still public schools. Anybody can go for free and public dollars fund them. So we have to be really honest about the fact that they are a responsibility of the school boards. And if you're talking about what is the school board doing to ensure every child in Duval County, every child in St. Johns County and Clay County, and the list could go on, is secure regardless of what facility they're in, I think that some people are going to have to live with some uncomfortable choices right now because this is the environment we are currently sitting with. Right. In St. Johns County, we do have some charter schools, a couple of them. They're very small. They serve a very select group of students, mostly our disabled student at the ARC school, the two ARC schools. And they're charter schools. They are a responsibility still to secure those kids of the school board. They are still kids that live in our communities. And while you may support or not support charter schools, or school alternatives, all of those kids are still ultimately a responsibility of our school board members. And even if a member doesn't prefer the methodology that a family chose to educate their kids, you still have to lean in and do the right thing by those kids. So I think this is one of the areas where even if we have a political disagreement in our communities about what is the best way to do something, we have to recognize that that some people are making choices that are their own choices, and we still have a responsibility to make sure that those kids are safe and secure, and they are going to come back and live and they play in the same playgrounds as our kids, and join the sports leagues and travel teams. The homeschooled kids, all of these things still engage with our public school kids. And it has to be a holistic approach. If we're not doing that, we're making political arguments out of safety, and I can't support that sort of an approach to it, because safety has nothing to do with what are we teaching in a classroom. They're two different discussions.
What happens in the classroom sometimes is a direct reflection of what happens outside the classroom that just happened to spill over. And all, I mean, I thank you guys so much. I love this dialogue. I want to keep having it in more segments if you guys are available. But for right now, we're going to kind of wrap up a little bit.
Okay.
Please keep doing what you're doing. Keep being that voice, listening to people, and taking that step forward. I really do appreciate what you guys are doing. Thank you for joining me today for another segment of The Buzz on Politics. I am your host, Martin Lopez. Thank you for joining us.